All of this, the legal tension, the spectacle, the economic friction, the international contrast, converges on one thing: public mood. Politics ultimately runs on perception, and perception shifts before outcomes do. Polls are not prophecy. They don't guarantee victory or defeat, but they are signals. They measure energy. They measure fatigue. They measure belief. And when credible head-to-head polling shows Trump trailing a major Democratic challenger, something subtle but important happens. The inevitability myth begins to soften. For years, inevitability has been one of Trump's greatest political assets, the sense that he cannot be stopped, that attacks only strengthen him. That criticism fuels him, that consequence slides off him. But inevitability is psychological, and psychology shifts when numbers suggest vulnerability. Because Trump's political brand rests on a set of promises, strong, declarative, emotionally satisfying promises, law and order, while arguing for exceptional legal treatment. An end to weaponization, while shielding political allies from scrutiny. Business genius, while economic pressures remain stubborn and deficits widen. American respect, while long-standing allies grow skeptical. Dignity restored, while controversies and displays of excess continue to swirl. Each individual contradiction can be defended in isolation. Politics is messy. Context matters. Narratives compete. But when you stack them together, the weight accumulates. Contradiction doesn't always collapse a movement, but it erodes confidence. And erosion is quieter than scandal. It's slower than outrage, but it's often more decisive. When you zoom out far enough, the through line becomes clearer. Trump isn't reacting defensively because critics are loud. Critics have always been loud. He's reacting because comparison now exists in plain sight. Comparison to democracies where former leaders face consequences, where courts function independently, where investigations don't automatically translate into collapse. Comparison disrupts mythology. It asks voters to imagine a political system where strength is compatible with accountability, not threatened by it, and that comparison cuts directly into the core of the brand, because the movement's energy has always depended on one foundational belief: he is different. He cannot fall. The rules don't apply in the same way, but when polling signals vulnerability, the emotional insulation thins. The strongman image depends on projection. Projection of dominance, projection of inevitability, projection of invulnerability. Once voters see even a flicker of fragility, the projection changes. Strength begins to look like strain. Confidence begins to look like defensiveness. Control begins to look like containment. And that's the pivot. Because nothing undermines a strongman narrative faster than the perception that he needs protection. If a leader requires the entire political apparatus to appear powerful, the image itself becomes fragile. Real authority does not require exemption. Real confidence does not require insulation from questions. Real strength does not depend on redefining accountability as persecution. When the public starts to internalize that distinction, something subtle but profound shifts. The performance still exists, the rallies still happen, the messaging still rolls out, but the aura feels thinner, and that thinning shows up everywhere, in headlines that no longer shock, in institutions that continue operating, in allies recalibrating relationships, in voters who no longer assume inevitability. Public patience changes before public allegiance does. Exhaustion accumulates, doubt accumulates, skepticism accumulates, and political brands depend on emotional loyalty. Once that loyalty weakens, messaging has to work harder, spectacle has to grow larger, volume has to increase, but volume cannot permanently replace trust. The deeper theme here isn't about one poll. It isn't about one controversy. It's about narrative erosion. Trump wants Americans to believe that immunity is natural. That strength means exemption. That consequence equals chaos. But the world keeps offering counterexamples. Democracies can hold leaders accountable and survive. Institutions can function under pressure. Power can be challenged without collapse. The more those examples accumulate, the harder it becomes to sustain the myth. That accountability equals weakness. And once that myth dissolves, the strongman act changes shape. It stops looking imposing. It starts looking defensive. It stops looking inevitable. It starts looking conditional. That's the crack widening right now. Not always dramatically, not always explosively, but steadily. In public mood, in institutional confidence, in allied trust, in the quiet recalculations of voters who once assumed nothing could shift. Political movements don't unravel in a single moment. They weaken when the central promise no longer feels convincing, if the promise is strength without consequence. And voters begin to see consequence as normal rather than catastrophic, the promise loses its power. Because in the end, nothing appears weaker than a leader who must convince the entire country that he is above the law in order to appear strong. That's the tension defining this moment, and whether it widens or closes will depend less on rhetoric and more on whether voters choose inevitability or accountability. I'm Isabella Pierce, and I'm just saying.